Escorre desses galhos como agasalho sobre um fino corpo frágil. Cecília, escuta, Cecília, não vás, permites o contágio do vírus da poesia, irmã. Sente o frescor do suor de mais de 1000 trabalhos que a natureza é assim, tal qual trabalhador ágil, não tarda nem descansa, não para em dado estágio, completa-se perfeita enquanto somos falhos. Ouve, Cecília, não há silêncio em que lugar o há. Se tudo vivo ou morto entoa 1000 linguagens e vibra e soa em nós aqui ou acolá, te deixa estar assim, só existindo as da vida que ela bem sabe onde desaguar, e nós aqui a sós, e nós aqui a sós somos tão só paisagem. Cecília, Cecília. Se tudo vivo ou morto entoa 1000 linguagens e vibra e soa em nós aqui ou acolá, te deixa estar assim, só existindo as margens da vida que ela bem sabe onde desaguar,
Boa tarde a todos e todas. Meu nome é Caio Martino, sou intérprete e vou estar aqui hoje auxiliando na interpretação da Conferência de Encerramento do Congresso Internacional de Estudos ISERIANOS, Experiências Estéticas no Século XXI, que será proferido pela professora Gabriele SCHWAB. Antes de apresentar a conferencista, devo dizer que essa sessão está sendo gravada, né? Vocês, participantes, visitantes, podem abrir as suas câmeras se vocês quiserem. No entanto, os microfones estão desativados para todos. De qualquer maneira, enfim, não sabemos se a desativação é 100% confiável, mas de qualquer maneira pedimos que não ativem, ainda que consigam, não ativem o microfone e que interajam pelo chat, certo? Bem, dados os avisos, vou então apresentar brevemente aqui a professora Gabriele SCHWAB. Ela é professora ilustre da Universidade da Califórnia, em Irvine. Ela é doutora em Estudos Literários e Teoria Crítica pela Universidade de Constança, na Alemanha, e doutora em Psicanálise pelo New Center for Psychoanalysis em Los Angeles, Estados Unidos. Agora, então, feitas as apresentações, vou passar a palavra, então, à professora Gabriele SCHWAB.
Thank you. First, let me also thank Professor Costa and Dos Santos for inviting me to this event in honor of Wolfgang Iser. And special thanks also to you, Caio Martino, for all the technical help in preparing this meeting. This is a very emotional occasion for me because with Wolfgang Iser was my PhD advisor and later became a close friend. In the late 60s, the University of Constance was founded as the first reform university with a focus on critical theory, interdisciplinarity, and philosophy. In literary studies, especially, the focus was on reception aesthetics and reader response theory. My decision to go to Constance was linked to this interest. And I did my PhD with Wolfgang Iser and then my habilitation in Irvine. Later, I attended conferences together with Wolfgang Iser in the US, Israel, and Brazil. And Samuel Beckett played a crucial role. We were also teaching seminars on Samuel Beckett together at my home university in Irvine. During my time as an assistant in Constance in the 1970s, literary anthropology was at the center of lively debates on literary theory. This interest runs through my own contribution to literary theory, even implicitly when my focus has shifted more towards theory of subjectivity, trauma theory, or in one of my most recent books, Radioactive Ghosts, the theorization of the legacy of Hiroshima and the atomic age. And my latest book on Samuel Beckett bears traces of an imaginary ethnography of the Beckettian world. For Wolfgang Iser, the interest at the time lay in literature's contribution to philosophical anthropology in the sense of Helmut Plessner. He repeatedly brings the role of the unconscious into focus. For example, when he argues that literary representation brings to appearance what by its nature cannot be objectified. This applies especially to the eccentric position of the human who, in Plessner's words, is but does not have himself. Plessner discussed this in relation to Sigmund Freud. The unconscious here is not conceived as the result of repression in the psychoanalytic sense, but more in Michael Polanyi's sense of a tacit knowledge of something that must remain excluded from public discourse, or as a not yet realized or unrealizable human potential. Literature thus becomes, in Isolde's words, a panorama of what is possible. Isa attributes a special role to the imaginary liberation from both social and biological constraints. The latter is manifested above all in a universal basic theme, which Isa sees running through all world literature: the knowledge of mortality and the end. Isa varies Foucault's idea of writing in order not to die by portraying literature as a postponement of the end, or even a suspension of the end. Literature probes the limits of knowledge and experience as modes of world disclosure. Literary staging, like in the theater, is, according to Isa, an anthropological mode that makes appear what is inaccessible to knowledge and experience. The quote I just cited shows that Isa's concept of aesthetic experience rests on a latent paradox, one that concerns the limits of otherness and experience. If, according to Isa, the anthropological dimension of literary experience is based on the figuration of something that remains inaccessible to experience, then aesthetic experience is grounded in the paradox of experiencing the unexperienceable. Radical otherness, in other words, can only be accessed through a fictional approximation of the unimaginable. Crucial to Isa's theory of literary anthropology is that aesthetic experience transcends the limits of knowledge and consciousness. In his claim that consciousness is not adequate to human experience, the human for Isa emerges as a deficient being. Isa is primarily interested in a universal anthropology of human nature, derived from the tradition of humanistic philosophy. Even otherness is not addressed through the experience of other cultures, but as an inner alterity, as the inaccessible ground of human subjectivity. Literature allows humans to always be other in the mirror of their possibilities. Aesthetic pleasure arises from the perspective that literature opens up the continual unfolding of possible otherness. Iser concludes his book, The Fictive and the Imaginary, with a question followed by a speculative thesis. And the question, does staging allow, at least in imagination, for an ecstatic life by enabling the human to step outside of what they are, to access what otherwise remains denied? Or do humans reflect themselves via staging to ceaselessly speak to themselves through the possibilities of their otherness? And here his final speculation, quote, and that may mean to carry out this duplicity, as well as to, in the playful enactment of this duplicity, attain a kind of endlessness that makes one forget the end. And I hear here a resonance to Samuel Beckett's work that influenced Iser very strongly, even though I think that his literary anthropology also tames the deep, dark sides of Beckett's work. My own interest in literary anthropology took a different path. In my habilitation thesis, I focus on the role of the unconscious in aesthetic experience and on literary transgressions of the conventional boundaries of subjectivity. Theoretically, I was interested in the intersections of anthropology and psychoanalysis, an interest that continues to this day. I share with Iser the focus on boundaries, experiences, and otherness, but with an emphasis on cultural anthropology. Particularly, I theorize reading as a form of cultural contact in the sense of Gregory Bateson. I also expand Iser's concept of a transfer between text and reader by developing a culturally and psychologically grounded theory of literary transference, and transference in the psychoanalytic sense. My reflections on the psychogenesis of readings are inspired by British psychoanalyst E.W. Winnicott, and I assume that reading unfolds in an intermediate area, which becomes the site of a creative production and reception of cultural phenomena. Literary language, in this sense, can also be understood as an intermediate area of speech. By exceeding the boundaries of knowledge, consciousness, and the cultural imaginary, creative productivity in the intermediate area acquires a speculative dimension. The Argentine writer Juan José Saer goes so far as to define literature as a speculative anthropology. In my own book, Imaginary Ethnographies, my aim is to define the specificity of literature in terms of its anthropological and cultural function. Beyond literary studies in the narrow sense, I draw on anthropology, philosophy, and psychoanalysis as contextual disciplines. One distinguishing feature of literary ethnographies is their appeal to the psyche, psychic life, emotion, and the unconscious. I return to a question repeatedly posed in literary studies. Why and for what do we need literature? With the aim of theorizing how literature intervenes in culture and at the same time produces culture and a rich literary field of the cultural imaginary. Literature acts upon the boundaries of cultures and actively participates in the formation of new cultural configurations. Literature not only generates culture and cultural knowledge, but anticipates forms of what is not yet knowable through the mode of aesthetic experiences. And there are resonances, of course, you see the resonances with Wolfgang Iser's work. At the same time, with its focus on psychic life and emotions, literature also expands the boundaries of subjectivity. And I elaborated on this more in detail in my own book, Subjects Without Selves. Literature also fulfills an important epistemological function. The epistemological theory by molecular biologist Hans-Jörg Reinberger offers a highly productive theoretical for grasping this epistemological dimension of literature and its relevance for literary anthropology. From Reinberger's perspective, literature, understood as an epistemological system, reveals its role in the emergence of new forms of subjectivity, culture, and life worlds. The focus of Reinberger's theory lies on the question of what it means to research something new that escapes the current arsenal of knowledge. For Reinberger, research moves along the boundaries between knowledge and non-knowledge. Influenced by The Shape of Time by art historian George Kubler, Reinberger argues that the creative process of insight anticipates knowledge that can only later be formulated discursively. In this sense, experimental systems are for Reinberger spaces of emergence. They function as generators of surprise and as machines for producing the future. In this sense, I develop in imaginary ethnographies a literary anthropology that theorizes literature as an experimental system for generating new forms of language, subjectivity, culture, and life. The phrase new forms of life carries a double meaning. On the one hand, literature is a form of life in Wittgenstein's sense, where linguistic forms are defined as life forms. On the other hand, literary texts are also relational objects that generate new life forms through the interaction with readers. Emergence thus arises not only from the anticipatory potential of literature, but also from readers' intuitive grasp of something they can experience aesthetically before they can understand it. According to Reinberger, epistemic things embody something not yet knowable. And if we understand the act of reading as an engagement with an epistemic literary thing, this implies that literary knowledge has the capacity to anticipate a later discursive form of knowledge. Literary knowledge far exceeds the referential function of literature. It is less knowledge about something than an experience of something, including new ways of engaging with language, thinking, feeling, and living, as well as the emergence of new forms of subjectivity and sociality. My arguments above also imply that literature's primary function is less epistemological than transformational. Psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas defines certain cultural objects as transformational objects. The latter participate in the ongoing reshaping of the boundaries of subjectivity and sociality, often with far-reaching political implications. Literature offers readers an invitation not only to expand cultural memory, but also to engage with future-oriented visions. Even when literature addresses the legacy of stories of violence and their associated transgenerational traumas, its implicit perspective always gestures toward the emergence of the future. Thus, literary texts can always also be read as imaginary ethnographies of the future. In sum, creativity, generativity, and emergence are the central aspects of literary anthropology. The complex interactions of cultural, psychic, and aesthetic processes includes the transference between text and readers, through which literature's transformational role unfolds. Literature and the arts more generally emerge in specific cultural contexts and create a cultural idiom by providing abstract forms and patterns that not only resonate with culturally sanctioned emotions, moods, values, tastes, and mental structures, but also intervenes and changes them. In this way, literature performs its work on culture, contributing to the reshaping of the boundaries of human potential and, through aesthetics experience, enabling the emergence of new forms of psychic and social life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Schwab. Let me hear from the organizers where we go from here. I guess questions will be open for questions now, if any. Professor Schwab, we have a question here from Ms. Lobo, Rebecca Lobo. Right. First of all, she thanks you for the conference. She thanks you for your presentation, and she goes. My research investigates how literary texts that thematize, whose theme are collective traumas related to structural racism, can act as a cultural criticism in the school context. I am interested especially in the way how these texts invite readers to reimagine the relationship with otherness in a dialogue with collective memory, something that I see resonates, something that resonates as far as she sees it with your reading of Iser's literary anthropology. I ask, how does Iser's idea of reading as a negotiation between text and the reader's repertoire can contribute for a more ethical meeting with otherness, especially in texts whose themes are silenced Black experiences, right? And in this process, how do you believe that psychoanalysis can help comprehend the reactions of readers, considering that these texts frequently mobilize affections or feelings such as guilt, denial, or projection?
This resonates very, very much with my own interest. I wrote actually one book, Haunting Legacies. The title is Haunting Legacies, and the subtitle is Violent Histories and Transgenerational Trauma. And in this book, I try to precisely address the question Rebecca asked. Now, this said, I think one has to go beyond Wolfgang Iser's framework to really address traumatic structures, because in that context, we need to pay attention to issues like, as you said, denial, fear, and all kinds of defense mechanism in order to break through the traumatic screen. And I think we can do this with writing and certain literatures, but theoretically, we need a framework that that includes trauma theories. And Wolfgang Iser's theories don't address trauma or violence or violent histories. In fact, this was once one debate between us, because he wanted his theories not to be political. And I disagreed, and I think precisely because I think literature plays a crucial role in also addressing violent and traumatic histories.
One more question. First of all, he thanks you. His name is Fernando César.
César.
Okay? Fernando César. Okay. So he thanks you for the conference. It's very instigating, very intelligent and deep, and it establishes advances in the dialogue between literary anthropology and psychoanalysis. So the question comes right now. How does aesthetic experience, as the way you see it, can relate with the individual elaboration of trauma?
Several times in my presentation, I introduced the concept of transference. And I introduced it in the sense Wolfgang Iser worked with the concept of transfer. And transfer is relatively straightforward. Knowledge, experience gets transferred from text to reader and so on. I introduced transference from psychoanalysis in the reader response theory because I argue that each reader brings different experiences to the text. And this is an individual elaboration, if you want, more or less. We each bring our own historical background. We bring our own traumas to the text. Sometimes we project something, we bend texts, but the texts are not fixed products. They are mobile, and they can become entangled with our lives. And each person can get something different out of a text. There's boundaries between text and readers that are very fluid, and dynamic. Usually with this concept, people ask, but isn't there a right or a wrong reading of a text? And I think we can learn from our projections that sometimes our experience and our individual elaboration creatively takes what we can gain from literary text. So I think if we project only our own traumas, then nothing much happens and we are not transformed, we are not changed. But if we realize there are boundaries in the text that challenge us, then we can gain something that can transform us. I have worked on this concept in much more detail in a book that is called The Mirror and the Killer Queen. And then again, also in Haunting Legacies, the book I mentioned before.
Professor SCHWAB, about the first question that you answered from Rebecca Lobo, right? That
Yeah.
first question. She mentioned that she is developing an investigation, right? That resonates with your own interests.
Yeah.
And then at the end, she asks, would you have suggestions of investigation paths? What way she could follow, what path she could follow in her investigation.
Could you ask, can Rebecca write in English? The easiest would be she emails me and I email her a suggestion. But if that's not possible, I can perhaps the best way would be the bibliography of my book, Haunting Legacies. There are a lot of suggestions with texts that deal directly with trauma, with violent histories, with transgenerational issues, and so on. But if she can email in English, I'm open. I'm happy to email back and forth with her.
One more question, Professor SCHWAB. So the question, of course, she first thanks you for your participation on behalf of her. She's speaking on behalf of her research group, and she would like to ask if there is, from your experience, other initiatives or researchers of Iserian studies, contemporary Iserian studies, with which they could dialogue in future events.
I can. Mihai Spariosu, I don't know if you know him, Mihai Spariosu. Unfortunately, some of the, perhaps, let me think who else. He's at the University of Georgia, but he's older now. I don't know. I don't know if he's still active and if he's still working. There's younger people in Germany. Kerstin Malke, perhaps at the University of Constance. Probably, I can't think of anybody who is really focusing. Ulla Haselstein, she's in Berlin at the Free University. Perhaps Irene Albers, but they all focus more broadly. There's no nobody particularly whom I think focuses mainly on Wolfgang Iser's work right now, unless, I mean, some of the younger scholars in Germany, I don't know unless they contact me. I'm sure there are people who work with his theories, but nobody who is now a prominent scholar who works. If I can think of someone, I will email you and you can perhaps pass it on.
Professor Da Costa, well, would like to thank you for once again for your presentation, for your contribution to the Congress. And she says that she has gotten many direct messages of people from the research group thanking and praising your participation as well, because what they are studying in what the studies they are developing really have to do with your own study. So they're very happy to be able to hear from you and to have you presenting at this conference. So thank you. On behalf of the organizers, thank you very much.
Yeah, let me thank all of you and thank you for the discussion, again for the invitation. It was very interesting for me, and I was very happy to be able to engage with your group. And I hope I invite you to stay in touch via email. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. And yes, thank you for your hospitality.
Professor
Bye-bye.
Schwab, once again, on behalf of the organizers of the Congress, thank you very much for your participation. We have reached the end of your session and of the Congress. So we are looking forward, the organizers and the researchers are looking now forward to the second Congress, since the first one has come to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thanks all of you. Thank you.